So today we're gonna do this guy and this one, but I just want to show you a couple variations. So this guy here is this one, but I put it in a pot and gave the pot like a funky little fun zigzag design. And then you can do other little pot designs too. Here are some ideas for some more pots that you can do. So you can do them like this without a pot, or you can do them like that with a pot. So, all right. I am just making my screen as large as I possibly can so I could make sure that I'm in the shot at all times. So today you're going to need a paintbrush. I have a size 6, but you can use whatever size you want. It's a round brush, although I smooshed it so it doesn't look quite round. There we go. It's a round brush. You can use a flat brush. You can use any brush that you have, any size that you have. A size 6 in this brand is going to be different from a size 6 in a different brand. So don't pay too much attention to the number of the size. Just as long as you like the brush, you're good to go. I have 140-pound cold press paper. You can do cold press, you can do hot press. What that tells you is if the paper is textured or not. So cold press, you can see very slightly here, has a texture on it. And hot press will be completely smooth. I prefer cold press. I use hot press if I'm going to be scanning the artwork to turn it into digital artwork. But that's outside of the scope of this class. So just grab yourself some cold press paper. It'll take a lot of scrubbing too. If you were to use, say, printer paper, it'll just fall apart on you if you're watercoloring. I'm going to move these guys out of the way. We're going to focus on this one. We also have, I have a paper towel, I have my paints, jar of water, and that's all you need. So we're going to get right in to painting these guys, which kind of look an upside down U shape, right? Or a teardrop without a bottom on it. It's like a flat teardrop, I guess. So it's pretty easy to paint these shapes. And then each one of these nodes just comes off of the main cacti. And then we have some sharp little, what do you call these things on cacti? I'm going to go pokey things. We got some sharp little pokey things that tells you it's cacti and you don't want to touch it. And then we put some bright flowers on these. You don't have to do splatters, but I think the splatter just makes it fun, and I'll show you how to do the splatters easily. So we're going to start by doing this. You can do the same. You can copy what I have here, or you can just paint your own. And now when we first start, it's going to be really light. So what I'm doing is my paints were dry in here. So I just put water a little while ago. And then I pick up some on my brush and I smoosh it around, technical term, smoosh it around on my palette, like so. And do you see how much water is in there? I mixed up a lot because there's a lot of different cacti on here. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and Lorraine will periodically pop in to ask me questions for you guys. All right, so I'm just going to randomly draw with my brush sort of a rounded shape that's a little wider on the top and a little narrower on the bottom. So I'm just using my paintbrush like I would a pencil and drawing in my shape. Now notice I'm using a lot of water. If the paint on here was too dry, I wouldn't be able to move it around. I'm using a new brand of paper today, and I don't know if you can see that it's kind of resisting the paint a little bit. And Here, I'm going to move everything up a little bit just so you can see, because I think my name might be blocking what I'm doing. Okay, so it's resisting the paint a little bit, which I don't love when that happens, but sometimes it does. So what I do is scrub back and forth with my brush, and that'll sort of force the paper to take the paint. And I'm not drawing a line across the bottom, but you can definitely feel free to do that. I kind of like those uneven edges. And that's how you get your base layer. I think I'm going to draw another node coming off here. Again, it's narrower on the bottom, thicker on top. And I'm just drawing the shape, and then I'm going back in and pushing that paint around till I sort of neaten it up a little bit. At this point, you could change the shape a little bit if you want, or if your paint skipped a spot. That. And my paint is obviously not even here. I kind of like how that looks. If it bothers you, you can take your paintbrush and move it around until it looks as even as possible. But it's cacti. You kind of want it craggy. Oh, I got water on my finished ones. I do that all the time. It'll dry. All right. So I'm going to put another one here. And they're kind of all going to look conjoined for a while, but then we'll use some shadows and things to separate them. And I'll show you how to do that. So we're just going to take our time and go across the page. Now, if you were to hold your page up like this and the water ran off like a waterfall, you're using too much water. If your cacti has stripes in it, it means you don't have enough water and it's drying as you go. So play around with how much water you use. Okay, I could make another node here. I could make another node here, or I could just start a whole other piece of cacti. So I think I'll start a whole other piece, and I'm going to make this piece a little bit taller, also maybe a little bigger. I'm just making this up as I go along. If you're the kind of person that has to plan ahead, you can plan out what it's going to look like by making a pencil sketch, either on a different piece of paper or on this piece of paper, up to you. But I like to wing it. Let me show you another thing. It's kind of hard for me to bring my hand around this side, so I can always flip my paper around, and it's easier for me to make that curve. So don't be afraid to move your paper around, and then I'm going to fill that in. And you can see where the edge of this one is because it was a little dry already. If it was totally wet, it would have all blobbed together like this, but totally fine either way, because with our second layer, I'll show you how we're going to put in some separation there. I'm going to flip that back around. I'm not loving the color of my cacti. It's a little yellow. I'm going to mix another shade of green in there. And I'll show you something fun you can do, speaking of another shade. You can actually, while this is wet, just tap into a couple places with your other shade of green, and it will kind of mix together on its own and make a whole new shade of green. And it'll give you some different variations. Now, this was very, very wet. So you see how all the darker green that I put in kind of just sort of like washed out. And then if I were to put a dot here where it's drier, it's not moving as much. I'm just gonna rinse that off. Okay, so I'm gonna put a node over here. And I'm using green, but if there's another color that you like better for your cacti, you can do it. Blue, purple, orange. It's your piece of art. Do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. If you want pink cacti, go for it. If you've been here for a while, you know how much I love pink. I'm gonna fill that in. And then I think another node here too. But maybe I'll make this one really thin. So maybe it will look like the side of one of these nodes. So I'm gonna make it look like this one's growing out from the side. Like so, side view. Like that. Do you see how the water is kind of pushing some of the paint to the edge and creating what's called a bloom? That kind of works fun with cacti because it's all craggy. It's in the desert, it's out in the sun, kind of like how we felt here in the past couple weeks. So you can get creative with it. Those beautiful desert colors. I've heard that it doesn't feel as bad out there because it's drier and there's no humidity or not much humidity. I think I would like that a lot. Okay, you can leave well enough alone if you want to, or you can keep going if you want to. I don't want to leave all this space, so I'm going to keep going. Plus, I need some more time for this to dry so I can show you how to do all these separations that we have here. Again, if you want to put a different color in here, let me do that. You can. Just dropping it in, and by dropping it, I mean, I'm just going to tap it into the areas that I can see are still shiny, so I know that they're wet. And you can get creative. I'm using a bunch of different greens, use different colors. This is still plenty wet, so if I move it around, it'll kind of help that color to move around a little bit. If you've dropped it on there and you think that it's too much or you don't want it that spotty, you can just take your wet brush, not too much water, you want to tap it off, and then just use the tip of your brush to kind of move things around. Just a little bit. Just tap it with the tip of your brush, and that kind of blends everything a little bit more. Okay, so let's do another one over here. Remember, you want thinner on the bottom, thicker up top. And then you fill it all in. And if you wanted your cacti to be all the same color like this one was, you can go for it. Just mix up a green that you like. So to get different shades of green, you mix together. So if you don't have green at all, you can mix together yellow and blue. And different shades of yellow mixed with different shades of blue will give you different shades of green. And if you do have a green that you want to change a little bit, you can always add some black to darken it up, some blue to make it bluer. You can add a little bit of yellow or even a little bit of orange or even a little tiny bit of red, which is the opposite of green. That'll sort of make it more of an olivey tone. Everybody doing okay so far? Maybe I'm going to make this node come straight up from the middle instead of off to the side. Trying to figure out if I want to add another node here, if I just want to leave well enough alone. I think I'm going to add one more. Should I? Yes, I'm going to add another one. I'm going to make it go off here a little bit. Flip that around. And then fill it in. And I'm going to let that dry a little bit. I used a lot of water on this, so it'll just take a minute to dry. If you are the impatient type like myself, you can always use a hair dryer or a heat gun, or if it's a hot day, you can put it outside and it'll dry a little bit faster. I'm really liking how this little variation here turned out. Kind of wish I had done it elsewhere. So since the bottom here is still a little wet, I'm going to add a little bit. There's a little wet there too. I'm going to add a little bit of that blue green. Tap it around with the tip of my brush to mix it in a little bit. Don't want it so pronounced. There we go. That's fun. All right, so I'm gonna have to let that dry. And then when it dries a little bit more, we're gonna darken up some of the bases. And then that's how we'll carve out these separation details on here to show that each node is separate from the other. Then we'll add the flowers, the thorns, and some splatters if you want to. You don't have to add splatters. Another thing I wanted to add really quickly, if you didn't want to put, say, another shade of green on there, you can always just use clean water. And when you put the clean water on here, I'll show you. So we'll just pretend that this square is our cacti. So instead of tapping in, you know, another color on here, if I just put plain water on there, do you see what happened there? The water displaced the paint, and so that gives you a fun effect on there. So you can just use plain water instead of putting a color, and you get some variations that way. It's kind of cool. Another thing you can do is when you do that with water, if you take your paper towel, put it down, press on it, pull it up, you get sort of like a little tie-dye effect happening on there. So that would have been more dramatic if my color had been a little deeper. It's very mild because my paint was light. But if you do it with like a darker, like say dark blue or something, it's fun. All right, so these guys are getting dry enough for me to show you how we separate these guys. So what you want to do is mix up a darker shade of green. So I'm gonna go back into those 2 shades of green that I had before. And I'm gonna add maybe a little tiny bit of black. You can also add a little bit of red to change the color if you wanted to. And then maybe a
quick question.
Sure.
If you wanted to do a color background, would you have to do that first?
You could, either before or after. It's up to you. Before would probably be a little bit easier, but you'd have to make sure that it was light. If you wanted a nice dark colored background, it's going to be hard to paint transparent watercolor on top of a darker or brighter even background. So if you were doing, like, say you wanted a sky colored background, which is nice and light, I would go ahead and do it before. All right, so I mixed up a little bit of a darker green shade. I used the green that I had before, and into it I mixed a tiny little bit of black and a tiny little bit of navy blue. And that's how I got my darker color. So what I'm gonna do is, where these two meet, I'm just going to draw a line, and the line is gonna look like this one. Like I'm connecting those two lines on either side. So I'm just going to, and don't be afraid to tilt your paper. I'm going to connect that to look like that line was never broken. I'm just going to go ahead and bring that dark color up a little bit and more to one side. And I think I'm going to go up this side with the dark color. Like that. Then I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to flip this over just so it's easier for me. And then I'm just going to use my paintbrush with that clean water on there to kind of blend out the paint, like so. I don't want a super perfect blend because it's craggy cacti. Then I'm going to go ahead and darken up the base of this one just a little bit. And I'm going to keep that darkness on this side, which will imply that the light's coming from over here. And same thing, clean my brush off. Work it into that paint. And I already know that I'm probably going to have to darken that up again because watercolor dries a lot lighter. But that's how you do that. And I'm going to keep going and keep darkening up. I need to mix a little more paint. Didn't quite mix enough of the darker color. And that's okay. If you didn't mix enough paint, you can go ahead and mix it more. And if it's not a perfect match, totally fine. The variation is kind of fun to see. Of course, if you wanted it perfect, you can just test it and test it and test it. But in that case, if you really want your color to be the same the whole way through, mix up a lot more than you think you'll use ahead of time. Okay. All right. So flipping this over again so it's easier for me. And I want this to look a little bit like this guy is a little bit in front of this one. I'm just going to trace the outline of where this one would be. Like that. And I'm tracing on the side of this guy. And then I'm just going to continue it down, right? Because I want to darken up that base. And notice I'm going like this with my brush. I'm not making a solid line because I just don't want a solid line. And then I'm going to take that shadow up the side a little bit. Clean my brush off. And then just taking my brush that has a little bit of water in it. If I hold my brush up like this, water is not going to come leaking out of it, but I can see the water shining on it. And then I'm just going to use it and nudge the very edge of that color where I put it down. And that clean water will deposit itself on the paper and will allow me to mix that paint. Now we've got another node sticking out here. So I'm just going to follow that line, coming up the edge just a little bit, and I'm going to do the same thing. Rinse my brush off. And I have a little too much water on there, so I'm just tapping it on my paper towel. And then I'm going to tap into the edge of that paint, And that clear water that's on the brush will help me blend it out. Kind of want to blend this a little bit more here. I just picked up more water and I'm blending. Then I have to do this one. Everybody following so far with the blending? If your paint is not blending out very well, your original line that you put down here like this could be too dry and you need to mix up more paint with water. Clean your brush off. You don't want water flowing off of your brush like a faucet, but you do want your brush shiny and wet. And then you just tap your brush, scrub it back and forth at the edge of that color. And that clean water that the brush deposits is going to help you blend that paint out. And just keep doing that for everywhere there's a joint. Anybody have any questions, or are we too busy painting?
I don't have any questions here, Kris. I think everyone's
right.
busy painting.
Sounds good to me. And when you rinse off your brush before you blend, you want to make sure that there aren't any water droplets or large water droplets on here, because as you paint, gravity is going to pull it down and it's going to get into your painting. I like how that's looking ready. So you can see the difference. This was our first coat. And this is with a little definition between the nodes. Kind of brings it to life a little bit more, right? Makes it a little more 3D. Darken up the bottom. Because the bottom of the cacti, most likely they didn't install floodlights in the desert, so there's no light coming up from the bottom. That's why it's darker down there. And if you find that my blending is kind of effortless, it's because I've been doing this for a while. So if you're struggling with your blending, it is really, truly a matter of practice. Practice, practice, practice. When I first started blending, it was a mess. Everything was sort of like chunky lines. Some parts were dry, some parts were way too wet. So it just takes practice to figure out how much water to use. That's the one thing that I can't give you a definitive answer. I could tell you kind of how I go about it, but it's really mostly by feel. You definitely have to feel your way around. And you're going to be using different papers, which takes the water differently too. So you need to play with all of those things. And you need to make sure that your brush is soft enough. Like those brushes that come with like the Crayola sets and things like that, they're often going to be too rough to give you a good result with your watercolor. So I like, this one is the Silver Black Velvet. I've just been experimenting with this for a few months and I like it, but I have to say my favorite is the Robert Simmons, Simply Simmons brushes that you can get at Michael's. They're really inexpensive. They're not made for watercolor. They're made for acrylic, but they're great. They work beautifully. And if your dog accidentally chews the handle, you don't have to worry about it because they were inexpensive. Now, after you draw this line, before you blend it out, if you wait too long, it'll dry and blending will be a little bit of a nightmare. So you want to put that line down and get right in there and blend it out. If you feel like you want your shadow areas to be darker, you can go in again and put another layer. This is the beauty of watercolor, is layering up. Watercolor will dry a lot lighter than you think it will. You'll think you have the perfect shade, and then when it dries, it's a pastel version of that shade, and you have to put in another layer. But it's fun to see all the layers emerge, and that's what makes it interesting.
Hey, Kris, does it look better to be consistent with which side of the node you darken?
It does, because it shows that the light is coming from one source. So we can assume that our light's coming from over here, since all of these sides are a little darker. You don't have to, because your light could be coming from multiple sources, and that's a whole other can of worms. But our primary light source, we're going to assume, is coming from over here. So that's why this part, the bottom left, is going to be in shadow. So you can just go on deepening it if you want to. I'm just going to deepen a few, because I just want you to see the difference. I'm personally fine with it the way it is with that first coat. And then I move my paper around a lot to make it easier for me. Even if it's still attached to the paper pad that you took it out of, just flip your pad around. Whoops, forgot to blend this guy. So now it's a little drier, so it's going to take a little more work on my part with my brush to blend. And thankfully there was enough water in that mixture to begin with so that it didn't totally dry, or else I would just have a nice dark stripe that I couldn't really blend out that much. Phew, saved it. And that's what we look like right now. You could even take the shadow out a little bit more. It doesn't have to be like thin on the side, it could be a little bit thicker. All right, I'm gonna let that dry for a minute. All right. So the next thing we're going to work on are the flowers. I'm going to give you guys a minute to finish up. And then we're going to work on the flowers. The reason I'm going to work on the flowers is because it doesn't really touch the inside. So we can really let that dry before we put the thorns on there. I'm glad I remembered the word for it instead of calling it pokey things the whole way through class, but they do. They poke your fingers really badly. I have a little cactus from Trader Joe's, and the little thorns are actually not thorns. They're more like hairs. They don't poke your hand at all. And I bought another one and I thought it was the same thing. Yeah, it wasn't. I had so many thorns in my fingers. It's not even funny. I don't know why I touched it. Who touches a cactus? I don't know. But I spent the evening with tweezers, like pulling these tiny little painful things out of my fingers. So the moral of the story is don't pet cacti at all. Get a dog. Just don't do it. All right. So flowers. I'm gonna make my flowers pink. You can make your flowers orange. You can make it blue, green, purple, whatever you want. Swapping out my pinks because I want a nice bright pink from this palette. Just throwing some water on there so it'll, and I'm rinsing all that green off of my brush because I don't want my pink to be green. If your water's too dirty, you can go ahead and get fresh water. Some people use 2 pots of water, 2 jars of water, one for warm colors and one for cool colors. I tried that for a while, but it didn't make a difference for me because I change my water often enough. And some people also have a jar of clear water so that they can mix their paints with it, and then just another jar to rinse their brushes in. That's a good idea too, but I just use one. Okay, so for the flowers, I'm going to show you over on a separate piece of paper. And you should always have some scratch paper with you when you're working with watercolor. That way you can test your colors to see what they look like, or if you need to test paint something, you have a little area to do so. When I was in high school, my teacher would have us mark a line off, and so that little 2 inches of paper on the left was the testing area. All right, so for the flowers, all you want to do is take your paintbrush, and if you are using a round brush like this, all you have to do is stamp it. To stamp though, you need to make sure your paint has enough water mixed into it. So I put 1 stamp down, and I just rotate my brush on either side, and I stamp. And I'll show you that again, but it's super simple. So you put your brush down and you stamp. You rotate it to one side and you stamp. Angle it to the other side, other side, other side. And that's how you get your flower. Now you'll notice that my flowers are double layered, a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. And that's because I just did 2 separate layers. And so I made larger petals in the back and smaller ones in the front. So I'll show you how we did that. So I'm gonna go ahead and work on our main piece of paper. And so if you want your flowers to be pointy like this, you start with the brush pointing away from you, right? You could also have rounder flowers by pointing it away from you, and the easier thing to do would be to move your paper. And when you do it this way, you get a rounder flower. Do you see how the edge of this is a lot more round than this? So you just decide which way you want to do it. I'm going to do it with the pointy side out, like on here.
Could you demonstrate the flower once more, Kris?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Oops, took too much paint. Okay. So you just start with 1 stamp, and I'm holding my brush flat to the paper, right? And then you angle it to the one side, and then you angle it to another. And I'm just keeping on stamping. If you need to pick up more paint, you can go ahead and pick up more paint. And that's how you get the pointy tipped flower. And then to get the flower with the softer edge, you just turn the paper to face you so that the tip of the brush is now where that flower starts, not where it ends. So you get a rounder edge of your flower. Okay, so now you have to determine where you want your flowers. I can already tell there's a nice spot here for a flower. Probably gonna put one here and maybe a tiny little one on this side too. And then on this side, I'm gonna go over here. And as with all of my paintings and all of the paintings that I show you guys how to do, this is my interpretation of it. And it's more of an illustrative approach rather than it be photorealistic. So if you've actually lived around these cool cacti and they look a little different to you, it's because you've actually seen the real thing and internalized it. This is just how I've interpreted pictures that I've seen. So I'm gonna go for the pointy flowers. So I'm gonna start here. And so I'm just gonna tap my brush down. It overlapped a little bit, totally fine. And then I'm gonna angle. So you can angle your hand or you can angle your paper. It's up to you. Whatever feels more comfortable to you. And I went in with a little too dark with my paint. So I'm just gonna add more water to lighten it up. And then I'm gonna stamp again with my brush. Angle it to the other side. Oh, so pretty already. Angle it to that side. And you decide how wide you want to go. If that's as wide as you want to go, that's fine. Or you can just angle it out again. And that's my first flower. And that's my first layer as well. I'm going to go in with a second layer. Or you could go ahead and make it as dark as you want to. All right, so I said I was going to go here and here. So I'm just angling the paper. And I'm going to stamp it. I go right next to it at an angle to the right, angle to the left, go back to the right. And all I'm doing is stamping with my brush, right? Not doing any fancy moves, just a stamp. Like so. Now, let's show you. That flower definitely came over quite a bit. If you don't like that, you can take a paper towel and just pick up some of it as best you can. I don't mind it. I would have left it, but I just want you to see. I'm just folding a teeny little square so I have a sharp edge, and I'm just kind of tapping it around to pick up that excess paint, like so. And you'll see there's a little shadowing there. Again, it's craggy cactus. I would probably leave well enough alone, but when I do my darker layer, it'll probably overlay just a little bit. And I also don't want the flower to look completely like it's behind this node. So I'll make a few little petals come over the top and I'll show you that. Also, if you wanted a full flower, you could keep going the whole way around. You don't have to stop with this half flower. I think I'll go here and put a small flower here. I think I'm just going to do 3 little stamps here. Small little flower, like so. Maybe it's just starting to open, right? Okay. And then we're going to go over here. Stamp. And I think that that looks like enough flowers. I'm not going to add any more. They're still pretty wet, so I can't do my second layer and show you that yet. So what I'm going to do is go in with the thorns And then we'll go back in and do the second layer. We'll do the splatters after that. And then we'll get into this guy, which goes really quickly because it's really simple shapes. All right. So for the thorns, I just mix up a darker green. You can use the same green that you use for that shadow if you have any left. I think I actually do have some left. Or you can deepen it up if you want to. And then all you want to do is draw some V's. You want some of them to stick off the side and you want some of them on the front. So I think I'm going to have a thorn here, like so. And they're just random. I do put them in the same direction because they seem to all go in the same direction. But I do put them around randomly. And I do make them pretty much the same size as much as possible. Just little V's, the letter V. You can leave some without if you want. You don't have to put them on all of them. And if you have trouble making thin lines, I'm just trying to put as least pressure as I can on the brush. If you have trouble making small lines, just use a thin brush, or you can even use a Sharpie or a regular marker to put the details in. And I find that when I start putting the thorns in, that's when it really starts to come alive. Maybe this one I'm just going to overlap like that. I'm going to leave that one thornless. You guys have no questions today, not many. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Hopefully it means you're having fun painting and you're not stressing out about it. So I just realized that I'm doing these V's up. If it's easier for your hand to do them down, by all means. Well, that wasn't great for me, apparently. I was doing them better the other way around. But if it works for you, flip your paper around. I'm gonna flip it back the other way. Also, in this one, I use a little bit of white gel pen to put some white thorns on. That's something you can do too, or if you have white ink. And I just realized that these kind of look a little more like tiny hearts. That might be a cute idea for Valentine's Day. All right, so this flower is dry, so I can show you the second second layer. And so what you want to do is either take the same pink paint you mixed up before or a darker pink and just stamp a second set of layers. Now for a couple of them, you want to put them in between two existing petals, like so. And for some of them, you can just go directly over your old petals, like so. There, you can see the two tones on there. Now, if you had made that mistake and you don't like that line, you can wait till it's dry and go over it with more of your green paint. It's up to you. And I will show you how to get splatters. I'm going to get all of this out of the way because it goes everywhere. So be careful when you're doing your splatters. You want to mix up some of your green paint. So you basically want to use the colors that already exist in here. Now, I would suggest that you wait till everything is dry before you do this stage, but we don't have a ton of time left. So what I want to do, I got some fuzz in there. You want to make sure, oh, that's another thing. If you have a palette like this, make sure you shut it when, you give it a couple hours to dry and then you shut it because you don't want any dust to get into your paint like I just did. So you want to make sure there's enough water. You see how that water is moving around in there? Because you want your brush loaded. Like if I were to hold this upside down for a long time, I'll definitely have a blob of paint come out. And what you want to do is to hold it and just tap it with your index finger. If you didn't want any of the splats to get on your cacti, like you just want it to be in the background, you can use a piece of paper towel and cover your cacti, but I think it's fun if it gets everywhere. See how much life that gives to it? Like it's so much more fun and so much more vibrant. It's like you're painting saying, ta-da, hooray! And then I'm going to take some of that pink and also tap some of that. And I just think that that just makes it look so much fun. This part here is kind of empty, so I'll put some like so. And that's how you get your fun, vibrant cacti. I just got a little extra ink on there. I can just dab it up. And there's your cacti. And because we don't have a ton of time, oh, and then you're gonna have to clean your desk because it's gonna be covered in paint. But this is a painting desk, so it's covered in paint anyway. So, and in the interest of time, we're just gonna go right ahead into our other cacti. I'm gonna put this guy aside, and we're gonna work on this guy. I've got plenty of space on here. Let's not waste paper. So these are a couple different ideas, and I will hold this up at the end of class if anybody wants to take a picture of the screen for ideas. But you can do different color pots, different shaped pots, pots with different designs on it. This one's just how I showed you how to mix the colors on the cacti. This is just a bunch of different colors on here that made it look almost tie-dye. Kind of fun. So I'm just going to go with a simple basic pot today. Now, if you're the kind of person that has to draw this out, by all means, go ahead and draw. I just freehand it. Sometimes the shape turns out great, sometimes it does not. I'm using aqua colored paint. I believe it is cobalt turquoise. And I'm just going to draw somewhat of a pot shape. So I make it a little curved because it's a round pot. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger. Now you can do your other cacti out of a pot like this too. This one's kind of like a hybrid between an aloe vera and a snake plant. I'm going to come down at a little bit of an angle, and then I kind of want to flip that over. Try to mimic the angle on here as best I can, or you can just go straight down. It's up to you. I'm going to have to take this up a little bit more to get the same angle. And like I said, if you need to draw this with a pencil, go ahead. If you're drawing it with your paint, like I am, you want to make sure that your paint is nice and wet so you don't get any stripe effects. And then I'm just gonna flip it over so I could get a nice curve. And if you're painting this for, I don't know, maybe a holiday card or a series of birthday cards or something that you're going to want to duplicate over and over again, you can always make a template and keep following that. All right. So my pot is nice and drawn in. Somewhat similar shape. I'm going to let it dry before I put those details on. So I'm going to show you how I make these guys. And you can draw it. Okay, so my pot's not 100% dry, so I may end up getting some of the plant bleeding into the pot, which I think sometimes that looks kind of fun. If, of course, that would drive you nuts, let your pot dry completely before you even attempt to start putting any of the leaves on there. So these leaves, some of them are behind others, and then there's a little bit of texture on there. We put a little bit of shadowing at the bottom because the light's coming from the top. The pot's a little lighter on this side, but I promise I didn't do that on purpose. It just happened. You can do that though if you want to get really serious about where your light's coming from. All right, so what I do is you can either do it like this, like an oval shape almost. We're just going to pretend that the oval continues inside of the pot. Or if you want, you could kind of make the tip a little pointier. Sort of leafy shaped like that. It's completely up to you. I might just mix the two shapes together so you guys get examples of both. And I'm just going to get real close to the pot. So I don't want it to blend together since the pot's kind of wet. And get as close as I can and just fill that shape in. And because I'm going to paint these so close together, yes, it's going to look like a bit of a blob at first, but the same way we separated out the nodes, we're going to separate out the leaves. And come over on the other side. And do another one. Kind of looks like Baby Yoda. Ears. And then you just want to keep adding Baby Yoda ears the whole way. You can make your middle taller. You can make it shorter. It's up to you. So I'm going to start right next to it. I'm going to put in a leaf. Maybe I want it a little taller. And then just fill it in. I really like this pot color. Now at this point, if you want to add variations like you did with the color on here, you totally could. I'm just going to leave mine well enough alone because I do want it to dry for the next step. And then I'm just going to go from left to right, back to left to right, and just keep filling in leaf shapes. and then coloring them in. And I'll worry about separating all of these when it's dry. Oh, these colors look so pretty together. I went a little taller with this guy. And then I think I could probably get 2 or 3 more in there. Maybe I'll go shorter with this one. I think we can get 3. A little bit taller with this one. If you made these a lot larger, you could also turn them into like an aloe vera. Maybe I'll make this one not so tall. And that's how you fill that in. Super, super, super simple. And it's still fairly wet. I can see some shine on my paper. My pot, I think, is dry enough for me to put a design on there. So I'm going to put a design on the pot before I go back in to separate out these and make them look like different leaves. Everybody following okay so far? I think I'm going to stop for a sip of water.
Like it's going well, Kris.
All right. Everybody's busy painting.
Yeah.
So you see how very shiny that is? That's very wet right there. All of the other areas, I can feel that my paper is a little cool on the back if I put my hand on the back of the paper, so I know it's still a little wet. That area, however, is very wet, so we're gonna let that dry. So I'm gonna use a darker blue-green. Feel free to use whatever colors you want on your pot. These are lots of different examples. And you can literally, I have a whole sketchbook page filled with just pots that were really fun to doodle. So you can make tons of different designs. I'm probably going to stick with a similar pattern to this. Maybe I'll go with zigzag instead of waves. It's definitely damp, so hopefully our design will hold and it won't blend together. I'm just going to start here and go up. And then I'm going to go down, back up, down, up, down, up, and back down. And then I'm going to follow it again. I'm not going to fill it in though. I'm just going to leave it as 2 separate lines. How fun. You could kind of pretend to be a potter or a pottery painter rather, because you're not actually making a pot. But if you are a potter, this would be a great way for you to sketch out some designs before you commit. And I think on the bottom, I'm going to do just a curve to mimic the curve that's on the bottom. A stripe would be fun too. So we've got a curve. Do I want to do anything else? Yeah, I think we'll go do a little short stripes, vertical stripes.
Kris, when you get a chance, somebody said they were having trouble with their thorns getting thin enough.
At the top of your, oh, you mean on this guy? You can go ahead and use a pen or a Sharpie, or you can use a really thin brush, because sometimes it's hard to not put a lot of pressure on your brush. So I'll show you a quick example after I get done with these lines. That's just my simple pot design. I feel like that looks really empty in the middle. So maybe let's do some dashed lines in the other direction. I'll do 3 lines and then I'll show you what I mean about the brush pressure to get thinner lines. All right, so that's going to be my pot design. So if I put full pressure on my brush, I get a thick line. If I ease up that pressure a little bit, I get a thinner line. If I put the lightest pressure possible with just the tip of the brush down, and I'm stabilizing with my pinky and the side of my hand, I can get a really, really thin line. And this is all different thicknesses out of the same brush. If you don't have that level of hand control yet, just get a skinny brush. So get like a size 0. And those are very, very tiny, just a few hairs on there. And you'll be able to get a thin line. But feel free to grab a Sharpie or a pen, gel pen, anything to make your lines if you're having trouble, or a marker if you're having trouble with it. Hopefully that helped. Okay, so for this guy, these are fairly dry. You're going to need to decide, you're going to need to mix up a darker green first of all. Still have a little bit left over from the other cactus. Add a little more blue in there. I love to put navy blue to darken up my beans. All right. You have to decide, is this one behind or is this one in front? So I usually just start from one side. And I think I want this one in front and this one in the back. Flip it over just because it's a curve that way and it's easier for my hand. So what I want to do is draw the line of where I think the end of this leaf would be, where that boundary is, like so. Just like we did for the node of the first cacti. So you darken up that line. Then you want to darken up the base. And then you want to decide, is this leaf going to be in front of that one? Yeah, I think so. So we're not going to bother to darken up the other side. We're going to darken it when we get to the next leaf. I'm going to bring that line up slightly like that. So do you see how that leaf automatically went behind this one? Then we're going to rinse our brush off, tap it off on our paper towel, and use your clean brush to blend it out somewhat. Okay. I'll show you. See how that shadow just pushed that leaf behind? And then I want this leaf to be behind that one. So again, I'm going to take that dark paint and I'm going to follow the edge of where that leaf should end. And then darken up the base too. And again, you may need to go over this 2 or 3 times to get it as dark as you want to. Don't be discouraged by that. And I think that other one also looks like it'll probably be behind both this one and this one. I'll show you how we're gonna bake that out. So we're just gonna blend this out carefully. I kind of like how this harsh line looks here. I'm not gonna blend it that hard. I'm just gonna leave that one. Now if you have too much water going on here, you can jump over to this side. And I think that's what I'm gonna do just so I don't get everything blending together completely. I ran out of paint. I'm gonna mix it up just a little bit. And I accidentally left my paint open, so there's a lot of fuzz in my paints, which I don't like. So if that happens to you, you let your paint dry completely, and then you run it under water. It won't mix together. It'll just take all the fuzz off. Okay. So I want this one to be behind both this and this. I should try to do it this way. So I'm going to pretend that this guy is behind both. So I'm going to need to trace out on this side. I'm going to, a little hard to do, where that boundary should be, and then where this boundary should be, like so. It's going to be quite dark most of the way up, because it's sandwiched by two other leaves. And then I'm going to rinse. Then I'm going to blend. And this color that I mixed up is way darker than the other shadow. So I can always just go back and kind of touch up the other shadows so that they're a little darker too. And then I'll hold this up so you can see what it's looking like. And again, this may dry a lot lighter than I think, and I may have to go in with another layer. That's totally fine. While I'm over here, I'm just going to darken up the base of this one and the edge, just so it has some dimension. So you can see how amazing that shadow is, because it pushed this guy right behind all of them. And I think this guy needs to be behind as well. So let's head there next. So to get that guy behind, we need to trace out two separate boundaries. So we're going to go here. This is where this leaf should be ending. And then this is where this one should be ending. Like that. And then you want to fill in that gap. And just like that, all of a sudden it's in the back. It's kind of way in the back, so I'm taking the shadow up pretty far. Just the tippy top is going to be a little bit lighter. And please practice your blends. Blend out. Just paint a bunch of rectangles on your page and work from dark to light. Like so. Do you see how that happened? So this guy and this guy, they look like one blob right now. I'm just going to put one tiny little line. I'm going to extend that shadow down just a little bit. So that little line separated them, like so. And these three that haven't been touched yet, I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow where it would naturally occur at the bottom. And this leaf is sort of hanging over, so it's darker on the bottom. If you're not drawing from an actual reference photo or a reference of an object in front of you, just stop and think a little bit about where light would be coming from, where light would naturally hit things. So the bottoms of all of these would be dark. Darkening that up. And then you want to blend it out. Now, you'll notice I kind of didn't go all the way to the edge, so you could still tell that they're separate. It joined a little bit there. That's fine. I kind of like that look. There's a lot of little things in paintings that happen by accident that turn out to look really nice, so don't freak out too much when paint colors touch or something. It's always fun and interesting to look at. And then we're going to darken up the base. Oops. Touch that one a little bit. Again, I'm not going to the very edge in most areas. Still want to maintain a little bit of light green under there to show that it's a separate leaf. And so now that has way more dimension, right? I realized that this line should have probably gone up a little bit. So if it bothers you, like it's bothering me a little bit, you could do something about it. If not, you can just leave it. I am going to fill it in and just make the stripe thicker. Like so. You could do dots, you could do dashes, you could do stripes, you could even maybe cover your page and do splats. And so it's only on the pot, so you get like a splattered pot. That might be fun. And the very last thing we're going to do is texture the leaves. So most of these are dry. So if you'll notice, they're very shaky lines with a darker shade of green. And some of them are a little bit dashed and dotted. So you can have a lot of fun with this. In fact, I'm going to add slightly different shade of green into my other green. And this requires a light touch. So what you're going to want to do is, if you're comfortable using any brush to get a light touch, go ahead, go for it. If it's going to be a struggle, grab yourself a pen, grab yourself a Sharpie, and put the details in that way. But if you can't, I'm going to show you here first. If you can, trying not to get my hand in it. So, because you want to have your hand stable. I just made a line and naturally with the shake of my hand, the line isn't super straight and neat, but that gives that fun texture. So I just start at the bottom, just the tip of the brush, very carefully, just thin little lines, allowing my hand to shake so that the lines aren't too perfect. And if you need to give your hand help to shake, kind of like tap with your brush as you go across. That'll make sure you get some nice shapes on there. And you want to make sure your paint's dark enough unless you want to go over it again, which might be difficult to go over it in the same exact spot. And that's how you get that nice texture on there. And you just keep going until all of your leaves, I keep wanting to call them petals, all of your leaves are covered in craggy lines. I put my hand in the pot and now it's smudged. Thankfully, I just smudged the line that was there and I didn't smudge it outside. So I can just neaten that up a little bit. So to avoid that from happening again, I'm gonna flip this guy over. You can wait till things dry or you can move your hand position. I'm not the most patient painter, so I'd rather move things around. I probably should have thought ahead and painted it backwards because I'm a left-hander. But you just want to take your time and fill in each leaf with lines. And you don't want to just go the whole way across the plant. You want to do each individual one. So maybe the lines don't line up perfectly and it looks more authentic. It looks like a plant. I happen to have a gel pen here. I don't know if it works. I'm gonna try, and if it does, I'll do one gel pen. Somehow I don't know. This pen works. Guess not. But if you did have a pen, use a pen instead. Or if you have gouache, which I do have, gouache is opaque watercolor. And you can find it at Michael's. I put some white gouache on here. I'm just doing the same thing, except with white instead of, and I'll show you what that looks like, instead of the watercolor. But gel pen would be really fun if you had that, or a felt tip pen, or just ballpoint pen. That's what the white lines would look like. It just gives it a totally different look. I personally kind of like the green better, but this can be fun. Or even like mixing them together. You know how some cacti have little white dots on it in between? Oh, I kind of like the mixture of the white paint and the green. I'll show you what that looks like. Maybe I'll go with that. I think the mixture of them together looks much better than just a plain white. And it kind of highlights that green leaf, makes it look a little more interesting, which I've never done before. So I like that. So you see how fun you can have a lot of fun with cacti. A lot of fun. I mean, paint a whole garden. That would be fun. These would be great on invitations if you're having a summer party. You know, instead of, you can cut these out. Instead of having a pattern, you can put somebody's name as a place card. Or kind of fun, just cut it out, use it as a bookmark, or stick it in the mail and send it to a friend. You can, this is cut out, and I just use that 3D adhesive that you could find at Michael's, the little squares. And so it's sort of 3D, which is kind of fun. You can have so much fun mixing plant tops to pots. You can even make a game out of it. Paint a bunch of tops by itself, kind of like how we painted this without a pot. And paint a bunch of pots and cut them out and play like a mix and match game. That would be kind of fun too. I know I'm getting a little silly, but I like to have fun with my paintings more so than just having the finished painting, just doing something with it too, you know. And I love gifting them. This would be great if you cut it out and put a hole in it and a string and wrap a gift. That would be fun, or put it around the neck of a wine bottle if you were giving a gift. That would be fun. Or even water bottles if you're having a party. You can say, don't be parched, don't be a dry cacti. Hydrate. I don't know. I'm getting very silly. It's definitely Friday evening. Does anybody have any questions for me? We have a couple minutes left. I will answer anything.
I would like to just interject and let people know that there's a couple of more classes coming up with you, Kris. So on July 21st at 4 o'clock, that's a little different. It's a Wednesday. Kris is going to show us how to paint a beautiful swaying palm tree. And then on July 30th, which is another Friday at 4 o'clock, Kris is going to show us how to paint colorful popsicles. Those are going to be a lot of fun.
Those are going to be a lot of fun. The popsicles are, you can get really crazy with popsicles.
Yeah. Your classes are always so much fun, Kris. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you guys all took the time to come and paint with us today. I always have so much fun with you guys. Just, even though nobody asked questions today, so I'm crossing my fingers and I hope that that's a good thing.
We have a lot of compliments in the comments, Kris, about how much people
Thank you
loved the
very
class today.
much. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, or please share what you made today. Lorraine and I love to see your work. You can share by either emailing Lorraine and she can put her email address in the chat, or you can email me at krisloyaart@gmail.com. Or if you are on Facebook, you are welcome to join my private student group. You can post your pieces in there and I'll make sure that Lorraine sees them. And that way, that's an easy way to keep in touch with me and ask questions and things like that.
Someone said they loved learning how to separate the leaves and the nodes.
Oh, I'm so glad, because I think that just, it makes it so much fun. It's so different to see it come to life and become 3D. So you just have to work on your blending. If you were at all frustrated with your blending today, keep practicing, just paint a line like that and use that simple line to try to work on your blending. What you want to do is blend your color into plain water. And that's a skill that takes a little time to develop. And this paper that you have, if you have 140-pound paper, you can really scrub at it with your brush and it won't pill up like if you were to do it on copy paper or something like that. So definitely practice that technique.
Paula, did you want to say something? I unmuted your microphone.
Oh, thank you. No, I was just gonna type a chat saying thank you. This was wonderful. I'm gonna do my cactuses later, but I've been listening and watching as I've been working around the house.
Oh, fun. That's a great idea, actually.
That is a great idea.
Yeah, I didn't want to miss it. I've had so many things going on, but now it's all in my brain and I know what I want to do.
Oh, yay. And I think that the playback video, the recording will be on the library YouTube channel.
Yes, it will, but probably not till Monday because the person who does the editing, I think, has left for the weekend.
Right. Okay, perfect. Okay. So it'll be on there so you can watch it over and over again and learn how to paint cacti.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, for all of you who wrote nice comments to Kris, please know that I will make sure she sees all of them. Thank you all for joining. And once again, Kris will be back on Wednesday, July 21st at 4 o'clock to paint a palm tree. And on Friday, July 30th at 4 o'clock to paint popsicles. So we hope you'll join us for those programs as well.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye now.